Tuesday, 1887. Dustwell, Kansas Territory. The sun burned so hard it turned the horizon to glass. Heat shimmered above the packed road, and the wind carried the sour breath of sweat and whiskey from the Red Scorpion saloon. Inside, laughter cracked like whips against the faint sound of someone crying. Lila Hart stood barefoot on a wooden platform, wrists bound in front of her. A thin white dress clung to her skin, dust staining the hem where it brushed the splintered planks. Sloane Dyer, the saloon's owner, leaned against his gavel like a preacher of sin, his grin slick with greed. Around him, miners, cowhands, and drifters shouted prices as if they were calling bets on a horse race. "50 to start," Sloane barked. The gavel came down sharp, wood on wood. "50 for purity, gentlemen, fresh as a desert morning." The men laughed. One tossed a coin that glinted before vanishing into the dust. Another whistled low and mean. The girl didn't look at them. She fixed her gaze on the far wall, at the faded mirror behind the bar, trying to find some shape of herself that wasn't trembling. Outside, the street lay still under the noon glare. Ezra Cole, a tall black rancher with weathered hands and dust on his hat brim, guided his horse to the hitching post. He'd come to town for flour, nails, and the small bottle of medicine his daughter needed when her chest tightened at night. His voice had been calm that morning when he promised Naomi he'd be back before sundown. He didn't know yet that promise would break. From inside came the sound of a gavel, laughter, and a woman's muffled plea. Ezra paused, the wind pressing hot against his neck. He turned toward the door, one boot sinking in the soft dust. The air in the saloon hit him like a furnace. Smoke, sweat, cheap perfume. The laughter stopped for a breath when he walked in. Every head turned toward the stranger, dark as the canyon's shadow, with eyes that gave nothing back. He saw her then, standing small and trembling on that platform, and something in his chest, something he'd buried deep 3 years ago, stirred awake. He remembered fire. He remembered how slow it was to run through smoke. He remembered a woman's scream he hadn't reached in time. Lila lifted her head, and their eyes met. It was only a second, but enough for him to see the same kind of terror, the kind that begged not to be forgotten. Sloane slammed the gavel again. 75, he shouted. "Come on, boys. She's worth every penny." The crowd roared approval, but Ezra barely heard. He felt the weight of the coins in his pocket, counted for medicine and winter supplies. He thought of Naomi's soft cough, of the nights he sat awake listening for it. Then he looked at the girl again, at the dirt on her knees, at the rope biting her wrists, and knew the world wouldn't forgive him if he turned away twice in one lifetime. He stepped forward, boots heavy on the floorboards. The crowd parted without knowing why. The saloon was quiet now, save for the ceiling fan whining tiredly above. 100, someone muttered. 110. 120. The numbers came quick, mean as flies. Ezra didn't blink. His voice, when it came, was steady as the prairie line. $200. The gavel froze midair. The saloon went still. Even the flies seemed to wait. Sloane's grin faltered for a heartbeat, then widened with greed. "Well, well," he said. "Didn't expect Charity to come dressed in dust and leather. Sold." The gavel dropped, and the sound echoed through the room like the crack of old wood in a fire. Lila's knees buckled. She didn't understand what mercy cost, only that the man who'd spoken didn't look at her like the others did. Ezra took off his hat, stepped closer, and said quietly, "You're safe now." But the words fell into a silence that was not safety at all. Across the room, Wyatt Bracken leaned back in his chair, arms folded, his pale eyes fixed on the stranger, who'd just made him a fool. He smiled without warmth. "That was my bid, rancher," he said softly. "You just bought yourself a debt you can't pay." Ezra didn't answer. He counted the money slow, deliberate, each bill marked by a memory of what he was giving up. Sloane's eyes glittered as he pocketed the cash. Outside, the wind changed. It smelled of storm and iron. Ezra touched the brim of his hat and led Lila toward the light, spilling through the bat-wing doors. Behind them, Wyatt rose from his chair, boots creaking, his shadow stretching long across the floorboards. The sun met them at the threshold, hot and merciless. Ezra squinted into the light, feeling the weight of eyes on his back and the first ripple of something he couldn't yet name. Danger, maybe, or fate. The sound of spurs followed them out. The street outside the Red Scorpion shimmered like molten glass. Ezra Cole led the girl into the light, his hand firm on her shoulder, but never rough. Behind them, the saloon doors swung and clattered like a pair of broken wings. For a long moment, neither spoke. The town's eyes followed them, through half-open shutters, from doorways thick with dust and judgment. Lila blinked against the sun, tears drying into salt on her cheeks. She couldn't tell if the heat or shame burned worse. The sound of boots followed close behind. Ezra turned his head slightly. The man from inside, Wyatt Bracken, leaned against a post, chewing a splinter between his teeth, watching. "Didn't know Charity was a business now," Wyatt said. His voice was calm, dangerous, in the way still water hides the current. Ezra adjusted his hat. Didn't know cruelty was either. The street went quieter. Even the wind seemed to stop for a heartbeat. Wyatt smiled thin, tapping ash from a match he hadn't lit. "You'll regret stepping in, rancher. Some things are cheaper left to rot." Ezra didn't answer. He led Lila down the boardwalk toward his horse. The animal snorted, sensing the tension. Ezra reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a canteen, and handed it to her. "Drink slow. You ain't used to this heat." She hesitated, her wrists raw where the rope had bitten deep. "You shouldn't have done it," she whispered. "They'll come for you." "They always do," he said softly. "But you're not staying there another minute." He didn't look at her again, just watched the horizon, flat, endless, white with glare. The silence between them filled with things neither could yet say. Down the street, the sheriff appeared in his doorway, pretending to scan the clouds. His badge caught the light, but his eyes slid away when Ezra's gaze met his. The man had no stomach for another fight. Dustwell had seen too many already, and law here belonged to the loudest wallet. Time 600 melms. Ezra lifted Lila onto his horse and walked beside it, leading them away from the saloon. Her dress fluttered weakly in the wind, the fabric stained with dirt and fear. She held the canteen close, but her hands shook too hard to drink. They passed the small chapel, its bell cracked, its door hanging crooked. Reverend Abel stood on the steps, looking down with a frown that was part sorrow, part surprise. He didn't speak, but when Ezra nodded, the Reverend nodded back. It was a small thing, but in a town like Dustwell, it meant something. Someone had seen and hadn't turned away. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of dust between dying fields. Ezra walked slow, keeping his voice steady. "What's your name?" "Lila," she said, the word breaking like a dry twig. He nodded. "Lila Hart. All right then." He didn't ask where she came from or what she'd done to end up on that stage. She didn't ask who he'd lost. Some truths didn't need the air. They already filled it. When they reached the edge of town, he stopped and looked back. A figure still stood outside the saloon, arms folded. Wyatt, a pale smudge against the dark doorway. His shadow stretched long across the dust, like a stain that wouldn't wash away. Ezra turned back toward the open plain. "We'll rest by sundown," he said quietly. "Then I'll get you where you can choose your own road again." But as he spoke, the memory pressed against him. Fire, wind, a scream swallowed by smoke. The word choose carried a weight he could barely hold. A faint cough came from far off down the street, the kind that made his chest tighten with dread. He knew that sound. His daughter's. Naomi. He turned sharply. A small figure was running toward them, kicking up dust. "Pa!" she called, breath catching. Her small hands clutched a paper parcel to her chest. "You forgot the medicine!" Ezra froze. The medicine. The last of his money gone. He swallowed, his throat dry as the road. Naomi stopped short, seeing the woman beside him. "Time 300 melms." Lila's eyes widened, shame flickering over her face. "This your—" Lila began, but stopped when Naomi's gaze met hers. The girl's eyes were bright and curious, but wary too. She looked at Lila's wrists, the marks still bleeding. Ezra went down on one knee, his voice low. "Naomi, this is Miss Lila. She's coming with us for a while. She's had a rough day." Naomi nodded solemnly, the way children do when they sense something sacred. She held out the parcel. "I kept the medicine safe, Pa." He took it, his hand trembling slightly. "Good girl." The wind shifted, bringing the echo of laughter from the saloon. Sloane's voice carrying far, already counting his earnings. Ezra closed his eyes a moment, listening to the dry rustle of grass, to the sound of his daughter breathing, to the weight of a new silence that felt like consequence. Naomi slipped her hand into his. Lila watched the gesture, her lips parting as if to speak, but finding no words. Ezra straightened. "Let's go home," he said. Behind them, Dustwell shimmered under the sun, the town holding its breath. Wyatt Bracken leaned against the door frame, eyes narrow, the match still unlit between his teeth. As they walked away, the first gust of storm wind hit the street, scattering dust like ash. And though no one said it, everyone watching knew. This wasn't over. The road out of Dustwell was a thin brown scar cutting through the plains. The sun hung low now, burning red behind the haze, and the air carried the taste of iron and faraway thunder. Ezra walked beside the horse, his boots sinking into the soft dust. Lila rode silently, her hands clutching the worn saddle horn as if it were an anchor. They had left the laughter and the smell of whiskey behind, but not the eyes. Ezra could still feel them on his back, the crowd that had watched, half curious, half ashamed. He knew how gossip traveled in a town like this. By dawn, everyone from the mines to the chapel would know that a black rancher had paid $200 for a white girl. He didn't care what they thought, but he cared what would come after. "Where are you taking me?" Lila's voice was small, thin as thread against the wind. "Somewhere you can breathe," Ezra said. "You bought me," she whispered, as if saying it out loud made it worse. He looked up at her, eyes steady. "No, ma'am, I bought your freedom. The rest is up to you." She stared at him a long time before looking away. The sky was changing colors now, rose, gold, then purple. A hawk turned circles far above them. The silence between them grew heavier with each mile, thick with things neither could name. When they reached the edge of the dry creek, Ezra stopped. "We'll rest here." He helped her down from the horse. She nearly stumbled but caught herself. Her bare feet touched the cool dust, and she winced. Ezra untied his neckerchief, shook the dust off, and handed it to her. "Wrap your wrists." She hesitated. "Why are you doing this?" "Because somebody should have," he said simply. His voice carried a calm that felt older than words. But she saw something flicker in it. Pain held tight, like a nail in the heart. He turned to the fire he'd built, coaxing it alive with small sticks. The smoke rose blue in the twilight, curling upward as if searching for forgiveness. "You got people waiting for you?" he asked after a while. She shook her head. "Not anymore. My father's dead. Owed Sloan money he never paid. They said the debt fell to me." Ezra nodded slowly. "That's what they always say. Debt's a trick. Starts with paper, ends with blood." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of sage. He stared into the fire. His face caught in the glow. "I've seen worse trades," he said quietly. "Once saw a man sell his brother's land for a bottle of whiskey. Folks will always find a way to put a price on what ain't for sale." Lila watched him, studying the hard lines of his hands, the quiet gravity in his eyes. "You've lost someone," she said softly. He didn't answer. The fire cracked, throwing sparks into the dark. His silence said enough. When the stars began to show, Lila pulled the blanket around her shoulders. She looked small against the vastness of the plain. Ezra checked the cinch on his horse, then stood, listening. The night was too still. "You should sleep," he said. "Are they coming?" He met her eyes, the reflection of the fire dancing in them. "If they are, we'll hear them." The way he said it, steady, without fear, made her believe him. She lay down near the fire, eyes closing to its warmth. For the first time in days, she slept. Ezra stayed awake, sitting with his back to a rock, rifle across his knees. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and bright. He thought of Naomi asleep at home, of her cough in the night, of the bottle of medicine he no longer had. He thought of fire, and of how it sounded when everything you loved burned faster than you could run. The wind brought a sound then, far, faint, but real. Hooves, more than one horse moving slow along the ridge above the creek. Ezra's hand went to his rifle, but he didn't move. He waited, breath held. The sound faded, swallowed by the wind. But he knew. Wyatt Bracken had started the hunt. Morning rose dry and colorless, the kind of dawn that offered no comfort. Ezra packed the saddle with steady hands, though he hadn't slept. His eyes burned from the smoke of a night fire that refused to die clean. Lila stood a few yards away, staring at the endless sweep of land. Her dress torn, hair tangled by the wind. She looked both free and lost, like something rescued from the storm, but not yet convinced it was over. The world was quiet except for the creak of leather and the restless stomp of the horse. Then came the faintest echo, a metallic jingle of spurs far behind. Ezra lifted his head. His face didn't change, but his grip tightened around the reins. "They're following," Lila said, her voice little more than breath. "Yeah," Ezra answered. "Men like that don't quit till they get paid, or die trying." He helped her mount again, eyes never leaving the ridge. "Hold tight," he murmured. By the time the sun climbed above the line of distant mesas, the small town of Dustwell was a smear behind them. They stopped at the crossroads where the telegraph wire split east toward the judge's office and west toward the lonely desert trail called Devil's Wash, a place folks said swallowed more men than it ever gave back. Ezra stared at the fork in silence. "The law's on one side," he said, mostly to himself, "and the truth's on the other. Guess we'll ride between 'em." Lila studied his profile. "Why do you help me, Mr. Cole?" He didn't answer at first. His eyes drifted toward the pale sky. "Because someone should have helped my wife," he said at last, voice rough, almost too soft to hear. The wind rose then, blowing dust through the air like dry snow. He tugged his hat lower. "We keep moving till noon. Then we'll rest." They rode through the flats, miles of sand and sage and silence. The land felt older than sin, carved by wind and regret. Now and then a raven crossed above them, wings black against the light. By midday they reached a small rise overlooking the plain. Ezra pulled the horse to a stop. Below, the world shimmered with heat and something else. Dust, moving fast. Riders. 4 of them. He didn't curse, didn't speak. He just stared, jaw set. "They'll catch us," Lila said, panic rising. "Not if the town sees." He nodded toward the faint shapes in the distance. Roofs, smoke, people. The edge of civilization, where witness meant survival. They rode hard the last mile. When they reached the first row of buildings, Ezra slowed, lifted Lila down, and faced the main street. The red scorpion sign swayed in the hot wind. Sloane Dyer stood in the doorway with his sleeves rolled, smiling as if welcoming an old friend. "Well now," Sloane called. "Looks like you brought back what's mine." "She ain't yours," Ezra said, stepping between Lila and the men gathering near the hitching post. "And you can tell Wyatt that." "Wyatt's not far," Sloane said. "Matter of fact—" The jangle of spurs cut him off. Wyatt Bracken stepped out from the shade, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. "Morning, farmer. Nice day for dying, ain't it?" Ezra kept his hands loose at his sides. "You want the girl? You'll have to shoot me in front of every soul in this town." Wyatt laughed low, almost kind. "You think anyone here'll stop me?" The sheriff shifted behind them, his badge glinting, his face pale. "Gentlemen, maybe we can—" "Shut up, Pike," Wyatt snapped without looking back. "You already sold your silence once today." The street filled with the sound of boots and murmurs. Curtains moved. Eyes appeared in windows. Dust swirled between them like breath held too long. Ezra's voice was calm. "You start something here. It won't stay between us." Wyatt tilted his head, amused. "You really think these people care? They watched her sell, didn't they? They'll watch you bleed the same way." Lila's hand brushed Ezra's sleeve, trembling. "Don't," she whispered. "Please." He looked at her then, truly looked, and in her eyes he saw both fear and a strange kind of courage. "I won't," he said softly. "Not today." Wyatt's grin faded. "Then kneel, rancher. Leave her, and I'll let you crawl home." Ezra's answer came quiet as prayer. "You'll have to make me." Somewhere, a door creaked. The Reverend stepped out onto the chapel porch, his Bible closed, but his gaze steady. Across the way, Doc Renard leaned against his doorway, hands folded. A murmur rippled through the crowd. A kind of reckoning, slow but gathering. Wyatt looked around, sensing the shift. He spat, dust swallowing the sound. "You think hiding behind pity will save you?" Ezra's eyes didn't leave his. "No," he said. "But maybe decency will save them." The words hung heavy in the air. Then, from down the street, a high, clear voice pierced the tension. Young, bright, unguarded. "Pa!" Ezra froze. Every head turned toward the sound. A small figure ran through the sunlight, her braids flying, her little boots kicking up gold dust. Naomi. His heart stopped. Naomi's small boots struck the dust like soft drum beats. Her braids bounced, sunlight glinting off the ribbons as she ran. "Pa!" she called again, her voice so bright it cracked through the tension like glass through silence. Ezra's throat closed. Every muscle in him froze as the street, the guns, the whispers, the hate, turned toward that sound of innocence. Lila stepped forward without thinking, her body moving before her mind caught up. She reached for the girl's arm, her hands still trembling from the ropes that had bound them. Wyatt's grin deepened. "Well, well," he drawled, his tone lazy and sharp. "Didn't know our hero came with family." Naomi stopped mid-stride, breathless, her smile fading as she took in the sight. Her father standing between strangers, the woman beside him looking half-broken, the man across the way with his hand resting on a pistol. "Pa," she whispered, confused now. Ezra moved quickly, stepping in front of her, blocking Wyatt's view. His voice was steady but low, almost swallowed by the wind. "Naomi, you stay right behind me, honey." The crowd had gathered fully now, windows filled with faces. The Reverend's hand tightened on his Bible. The sheriff lingered by the post, his gaze darting between the armed men like a gambler waiting on a losing hand. Wyatt tilted his head toward Lila. "You see that, sweetheart? Even good men come with weaknesses." "Don't," Lila said suddenly, her voice sharp, cutting through the murmurs. She stepped beside Ezra, no longer shrinking, no longer shaking. "You've taken enough from people weaker than you." That made Wyatt laugh, a deep, ugly sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You think I'm afraid of a girl who just got bought like a mule?" Something in Ezra snapped, but it wasn't rage. It was resolve. He turned to face the street, letting everyone hear him. "She's not bought. She's free. And anyone says different's got to face me right here, right now, in front of every child watching." His voice carried clear as a bell. The words hung in the air, and with them came silence. Heavy, waiting, electric. Naomi clung to the hem of his coat, her wide eyes darting from face to face. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood danger. Wyatt's eyes flicked to the sheriff. "You gonna let this farmer run the law now?" Sheriff Pike swallowed hard. "This town's had enough blood for one summer," he muttered. "Then you best move," Wyatt said, stepping forward. "Because I got a claim, and I'll take it." Ezra raised his voice. "Then show your claim on paper, or walk away." The sheriff hesitated, glancing between them, then looked down at the dirt. "He paid me a deposit," Wyatt said, smirking. $50 for first rights. Ask Sloan." The crowd turned. Sloan Dyer stepped from the saloon, wiping his hands on a stained rag. "Well," he said slowly, "that's true enough." "You got proof?" Ezra asked. Sloan's grin twitched. "Proof's not how business works around here." The Reverend's voice broke through then, calm but fierce. "Then maybe it's time business stopped being sin dressed up as law." Wyatt shot him a glare. "You keep your sermons in your church, preacher." Lila's voice came, quiet but unshaking. "I worked for Sloan. I kept his ledgers. I know what's in them." That made Sloan turn pale. "You don't know what you're talking about, girl." "Yes, I do," she said. "You've been stealing from every man you trade with, including him." She nodded toward Wyatt. That $50 came from money that never should have left your safe. The crowd stirred, a low, uneasy sound. Wyatt frowned, suspicion flickering in his eyes. You calling me a fool, Sloane? Sloane's mouth opened, then closed. Ezra's eyes met Lila's for a brief second, and for the first time since the platform, she wasn't trembling. Naomi tugged her father's sleeve, whispering, "Pa, I'm scared." He bent slightly, his hand finding hers. So am I, baby girl. But we stand still when fear comes. Thunder rolled far off. Distance. A storm gathering, slow and certain. Wyatt's fingers twitched near his gun, but his eyes never left Sloane. We'll talk about this, he said finally, his tone low and cold. Somewhere private. He turned to Ezra, sneering. Don't think this means you won. You just put yourself in a hole too deep to climb out of. Ezra watched him go, the dust curling around the man's boots like smoke. The sheriff followed, muttering something about order. When they were gone, Lila's knees gave out. Ezra caught her before she hit the ground. She looked up at him, eyes wet but shining. You didn't have to do that. He smiled faintly. Yeah, I did. The Reverend stepped closer. Judge Hollis will be here come morning. We'll bring this into daylight, where lies can't live long. Ezra nodded, still holding Lila steady. Then I'll see it through. But his eyes drifted to the ridge beyond town, the road curling toward the desert. Devil's Wash. He'd ridden it before, years ago, when the world had already taken too much from him. He knew what waited out there. Rest for now, he said quietly. We leave before sunrise. He turned toward the setting light, the sky bleeding red above the plains. He didn't see Wyatt stop at the edge of town, watching them from afar, and he didn't see the glint of metal as Wyatt's men settled in along the road. Dawn crept in, pale and uncertain. The first light turned Dustwell Street into ribbons of gray and gold, painting the cracked windows and tired signs with a false calm. Ezra stood by the hitching post, tightening the saddle with steady hands, though he hadn't slept. His eyes burned from the smoke of a night fire that refused to die clean. Lila packed what little they had, while Naomi sat nearby, humming softly, tracing circles in the dust with a stick, unaware of how much danger hung over them like storm clouds. The saloon doors swung open behind them. Sloane Dyer stepped out, vest half-buttoned, a grin like a knife spreading across his face. "Morning, Farmer Cole," he called. "You and your little charity cases ain't going nowhere." Ezra didn't turn. "You got something to say? Say it." Sloane held up a scrap of paper, folded and greasy. "Contract," he said proudly. "Wyatt paid me $50 last week for first claim. Means that girl's his, not yours." Ezra straightened slowly, the light catching the edge of his jaw. "You got it signed by her? Or by anyone sober enough to write their name?" Sloane's grin faltered. "Ain't how it works here, friend. We make deals, not paperwork. The law don't care much for deals that sell people," Ezra said, voice low but hard. "Law?" Sloane spat the word like a seed. Sheriff Pike runs the law here, and Pike says it's a fair trade. The sheriff appeared then, moving like a man dragged by his own boots. His eyes were sunken, his face pale from a night without sleep. "Just hand her over, Ezra," he said quietly. "Let it rest. Don't make more trouble than it's worth." Lila stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. "Sheriff, that contract's a lie. I worked for Sloan. I kept his books. He's been stealing from Wyatt for months. The money he says he got from him ain't clean." The sheriff's eyes darted nervously toward Sloan. "You got proof of that?" Lila hesitated, then nodded. "In his ledger. The one with the green cover. He hides it in a false drawer under the safe." Sloan went pale. "You don't know what you're saying, girl." But the crowd was forming again. Miners, shopkeepers, mothers holding their children's hands. Faces that had looked away yesterday now watched, uneasy. Ezra raised his voice, calm but strong. "Then let's call Judge Hollis. Let him decide what's fair." Sloane's smirk returned, brittle around the edges. "Hollis ain't due till next week." The Reverend's voice rang out from the chapel steps. "Then we'll send for him today. And until then, the girl stays free." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Not cheers yet, but something close to awakening. Sloan turned to the sheriff. "You hear that? They're taking your job, Pike." Pike wiped sweat from his brow. "Judge Hollis can settle it. That's his place." Ezra met Lila's eyes. She nodded once. A quiet vow. She'd stand in front of the truth if it killed her. "I'll fetch the judge myself," a young messenger called from the edge of the crowd. Without waiting for orders, he ran toward the telegraph office, the sound of his boots fading into distance. For a long moment, no one moved. The air shimmered with heat and tension. Sloan broke first. "You're playing with fire, Cole. That ledger don't exist." Lila's voice was steady now. "Then you won't mind if the judge opens your safe." Sloane's jaw twitched. Ezra rested a hand on Naomi's shoulder. "We'll wait by the chapel till the judge arrives." Sloan spat into the dust. His patience burned away. "You'll regret crossing me," he growled. "That girl ain't worth the dirt she's standing on." Ezra turned, his expression unreadable. "Then it's the dirt I'll stand with." As they walked toward the chapel, the Reverend's bell rang once, clear and deep, a call that spread through the town like conscience waking from sleep. From somewhere beyond the ridge, thunder rolled. Not storm thunder, but the hollow echo of hooves moving fast. Wyatt Bracken was coming back. Ezra looked toward the horizon, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "We need to be ready," he murmured. Lila touched the bandage around her wrist and whispered, "He won't stop, will he?" "No," Ezra said quietly. "But neither will we." And from far down the road, the faint silhouette of a rider appeared against the morning light, a man carrying the weight of judgment in his stride. Judge Hollis was on his way. By the time Judge Hollis arrived, the town was holding its breath. Dustwell had not seen law in months. Not the kind that stood taller than a bottle or a gun. His horse was gray with age, his coat the color of courthouse dust. But his eyes, sharp and steady, cut through the morning haze like truth itself. "Where's the dispute?" he asked, stepping down, voice deep enough to quiet the street. Sloane Dyer came forward first, his smile strained. "Simple matter, Your Honor. A business misunderstanding. Man took something that ain't his." Ezra stood beside Lila, hat in hand. "I took nothing but a person who should never have been sold." A ripple went through the crowd. Hollis studied him a long moment, then turned to Sloane. "You got papers for this sale?" Sloane hesitated. "Not exactly." "Then what do you have?" He reached into his vest and pulled out the greasy scrap he'd shown earlier. Hollis unfolded it, read the single line scrawled in sloppy ink, then looked back at him. "This isn't a contract," he said evenly. "It's a confession of sin." The sheriff shifted uneasily. "Judge, if I may." "No, you may not," Hollis said sharply. His gaze turned to Lila. "You were the one sold?" Lila swallowed, voice trembling. "Yes, sir." "Do you have any proof of what Mr. Dyer's been doing?" Her hands twisted the edge of her sleeve. "He keeps a ledger, sir." "Green cover. Under the safe." Sloane's face drained of color. "You lying witch! Rate X slow." "Quiet," Hollis ordered. "Sheriff Pike, fetch the ledger." The sheriff hesitated. Everyone saw it. His loyalty, his fear, his shame, all tangled in the pause. Ezra's voice broke the stillness, low but firm. "I'll fetch it, if he won't." That was enough. Pike moved, trudging into the saloon. The silence stretched until the sound of metal scraped wood. Moments later, he emerged with a thick green book, and eyes wide with panic. It was really there. Hollis opened it. The crowd pressed closer. Line after line of names, numbers, and figures. Money taken, debts invented, lives bought and sold. Then another column, hidden beneath overlapping ink, payments from Wyatt Bracken's ranch, and next to them numbers marked skim. The judge's jaw tightened. "Looks like 20% missing on every deal." "Mr. Dyer, you've been stealing from your buyers, then selling people to cover the hole." Sloane sputtered. "It's business. Everybody does it." "Not under my law," Hollis said. He turned a page. "Miss Hart, your name's here too, under property transferred. You're listed as debt payment." Lila's breath caught. "I never owed him a cent." "I know," the judge said. "That's the point." The crowd began to murmur, anger building like thunder. Sloane backed up a step. "You all think you're saints? You drank my whiskey, bet on my tables. Don't pretend clean now." Ezra spoke quietly, and everyone heard him anyway. "There's clean, and there's trying to be." For a moment, Sloane looked ready to draw. But Wyatt Bracken's voice cut through the noise. "He's right." All heads turned. Wyatt rode in slow, dust trailing behind him, His face was hard, his pride wounded, but his eyes burned colder than before. "That ledger says he stole from me too, don't it?" Hollis nodded once. "Every deal for 6 months." Wyatt's grin twisted. "Then I reckon I've been paying for my own humiliation." He turned to Sloane, the air between them brittle as glass. "You and me got unfinished business." "Not here," Hollis warned. "You'll settle this by law, not lead." Wyatt's smirk didn't reach his eyes. "Sure, Judge. Law." But his hand never strayed far from his holster. Ezra stepped in front of Lila, his shadow stretching long in the dust. "You come for her. You'll ride through me first." Wyatt's gaze shifted, curious, even grudgingly respectful. "You sure you know what line you're drawing, Farmer?" "The right one," Ezra said calmly. The judge snapped the ledger shut. "Court convenes at dawn tomorrow. Until then, Miss Hart stays under protection of the law and of this town." He looked toward the chapel, where the Reverend stood with his hands folded. "She'll be safe there tonight." The crowd began to disperse. Whispers of guilt and awe carried in the dry wind. Sloane was dragged away in irons, cursing everyone's name. Wyatt lingered, his eyes on Ezra. "Tomorrow's sunrise'll decide a lot of things." "Then I'll be there," Ezra said. He turned toward Lila, who looked pale but unbroken. Naomi slipped her small hand into hers, and for a moment, Lila forgot what trembling was. Behind them, thunder rolled again, closer now, more than just a storm, rate X slow. The night ahead would not be kind. The desert opened before them, like a warning. By twilight, the land had turned to red clay and bone, the air sharp enough to cut breath. Ezra guided the horse along a narrow trail carved by years of wind, his eyes scanning the cliffs that rose jagged on both sides. The path was called Devil's Wash for a reason. Sound didn't travel here, and the dead never echoed. Lila rode behind him, her fingers gripping the worn leather saddle. Naomi sat between them, drowsy but uneasy, her small body tensing each time the horse stumbled on loose gravel. Every shadow looked alive in that half-light. The desert had a way of testing who truly wanted to live. "You sure this is the right way?" Lila asked softly. "Right way's the one that gets you home," Ezra said. "And if it gets us killed, then at least we die trying to live decent." The silence that followed was heavy but clean, like the calm after confession. They rode on, the sun dipping behind the cliffs. A dry wind came down from the ridge, carrying the faint rattle of stones, something moving above them, too deliberate to be the wind. Ezra slowed the horse, listening. He could hear them now. Hooves, metal. A voice calling quietly, then cut short. "They're here," he said. Lila turned, her face pale in the fading light. "Wyatt." Ezra nodded once. "Keep Naomi close." The canyon narrowed, the walls pressing in until the trail felt more like a throat than a road. The smell of dust and iron filled the air. Ezra led the horse behind a cluster of rocks and motioned for silence. They waited. Seconds stretched thin. Naomi's breathing grew shallow. Ezra glanced at her. Her small chest rose unevenly, panic creeping in. He knew that sound too well. He'd heard it in the nights when her sickness caught her off guard. "Breathe slow, baby," he whispered, kneeling beside her, just like at home. "Remember?" Lila crouched beside them, tearing a strip from her skirt and fanning the child's face. "Stay with me, sweetheart. In and out, in and out." The girl tried, but the fear had already taken root. Her breaths came faster, shorter, a wheeze that cut deep into the silence. Above them, loose gravel crunched, someone shifting position. Ezra raised his head, eyes narrowing. He could see shadows along the ridge now, faint shapes against the dying sun. He turned to Lila. "We can't wait. If we stay, they'll trap us in this cut." "What do we do?" she asked. He didn't answer. He took Naomi into his arms and began to climb the side of the canyon where the stone rose rough and sharp. "Up," he said. "The wind hides our sound." They moved quickly but quietly, slipping between cracks in the rock. The climb tore Lila's palms, but she didn't stop. The closer they got to the top, the louder the wind became, like the earth itself whispering, "Hurry." When they reached the ridge, the last light of day bled over the horizon. Ezra set Naomi down gently, wrapping her in his coat. "Rest here," he said. Below, the faint flicker of torches began to appear. Wyatt's men, combing through the canyon. The glow painted the cliffs orange, like old fire revived. Lila stared at the sight, heart hammering. "He won't stop," she whispered. "He'll burn the whole world to find what he thinks he owns." Ezra looked at her then, and for the first time she saw something break through his calm. A glint of sorrow, maybe guilt. "I know the kind," he said. "Once I was too slow to stop one." She turned to him, the question already in her eyes. But he didn't go on. The wind swallowed his words, carrying them down into the canyon like secrets lost to sand. Naomi stirred, whispering through half-sleep, "Pa, is the fire coming?" Ezra brushed a hand across her hair. "Not this time." He glanced at the darkening ridge. "We'll ride through before dawn," he said, more to himself than to her. "If the Lord means for us to live, He'll show the way." Below, a torch flared brighter. The men had found the horse tracks. Wyatt's voice rose, distant but clear. "No more hiding, farmer. The desert's got only one way out." Lila met Ezra's eyes, the firelight flickering in both their faces. "What do we do when they catch up?" Ezra chambered a single round into the small pistol Doc Whitman had given him. The metal clicked once, sharp in the wind. "Then we find out if the truth can still scare a man more than death." A gust tore through the canyon, scattering the torches below into tiny, flickering ghosts. The night had come, and with it, the reckoning. Night fell hard, over Devil's Wash. The canyon lay deep in shadow, a black vein running through the desert's ribs. Ezra crouched low behind a jagged outcrop, feeling the pulse of the land beneath him. Steady, ancient, indifferent. Below, torchlight wavered like dying stars as Wyatt Bracken's men fanned out, boots scraping on stone. The heat of the day still clung to the rocks, pressing sweat into Ezra's neck. Beside him, Lila held Naomi close, her palm on the girl's chest, counting breaths. "She's getting worse," Lila whispered. Ezra nodded grimly. "Keep her head up. When air gets scarce, you fight for every inch of it." Down in the canyon, Wyatt's voice echoed, sharp, taunting. "You can't hide forever, Cole. The desert's a clean judge. It buries liars quick." Ezra closed his eyes. That voice dragged old pain to the surface. Firelight, screams, his wife's hand slipping from his grasp, while men stood and watched. He'd arrived too late that night. He wasn't going to arrive too late again. He turned to Lila. "When I move, take Naomi and keep north along the ridge. There's an old wash where the rocks fall soft. You'll see it by moonlight." "And you?" she asked. "I'll keep them looking the wrong way." Before she could answer, the faint crunch of gravel gave them away. A rifle cracked. The bullet struck stone inches from Lila's shoulder. She gasped, clutching Naomi tight. "Go!" Ezra hissed. He rose from cover, firing once into the air, not at them but toward the torchlight below. The sound split the canyon like a whip. "You want me, Bracken?" he shouted. "Come earn it!" Wyatt's laughter rolled through the dark. "You always did like playing hero." He stepped into view, the firelight catching his pale eyes. 3 men flanked him, rifles half raised. But Wyatt didn't lift his weapon. Not yet. He walked closer, each step slow, deliberate. "Let the girl go, farmer," he called. "She ain't yours. You think saving her'll save you?" Ezra stood still, breathing hard. "I don't need saving. You got a sick kid, no land, no future," Wyatt said, circling. "That ledger's gonna hang me or you. Depends who makes it back to Dustwell." "Then shoot," Ezra said. "Let's see which one of us the desert keeps." But before Wyatt could raise his gun, a sound broke the tension. A thin, strangled wheeze. Naomi's breathing had turned ragged, the rattle in her chest now desperate. Lila knelt beside her, panicked. "Ezra!" He turned, instinct overpowering strategy. Dropping to his knees, he pressed his ear to the girl's lips. "Naomi, breathe, baby. Come on. In through the nose, out slow. You got this." Wyatt froze, watching. His men glanced at one another, uncertain. The sound of a child dying has a way of pulling at whatever scraps of decency a man has left. For a long moment, nothing moved but the wind. Then Wyatt lowered his rifle. "Here," he muttered, pulling the canteen from his belt. He tossed it toward them. It hit the rock and rolled to Ezra's boot. "Give her water. I ain't winning this way." Ezra looked up, stunned. "Why?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Because I ain't Sloan." Silence hung heavy. The canyon felt less like a trap and more like a confession. Ezra lifted the girl's head gently, letting a few drops fall against her lips. She drank, gasping, the color slowly returning to her face. Lila's tears caught moonlight like silver dust. When she could finally breathe again, Wyatt turned away. Tomorrow, Judge Hollis can open his damn ledger. But you remember, Cole, no one walks clean forever. As he and his men disappeared into the darkness, Ezra sat still, hand resting on Naomi's shoulder. His heart hammered, but not from fear, from something like understanding. Lila looked at him, voice barely a whisper. You think he'll come back? Yeah, Ezra said. But next time, maybe not with a gun. Above them, the wind howled through the stone, carrying away the scent of fire and the echo of mercy. Morning broke pale, over Dustwell, the kind of light that peeled secrets from the earth, whether the town wanted them shown or not. The church bell had rung at dawn. Now the street outside the saloon was crowded. Miners, merchants, mothers, even children clutching their fathers' legs. Everyone waited for the same thing: truth, or whatever was left of it. Judge Hollis stood in the middle of it all, sleeves rolled, the Bible and the law book both at his side. His voice carried calm authority, the sound of a man who'd seen too much to be fooled anymore. Open the safe, Mr. Dyer. Sloane Dyer, pale and hollow-eyed after a sleepless night, hesitated near the saloon door. Judge, this is a waste of... Open it, Hollis repeated. Sloane swallowed. The sheriff, looking older than he had yesterday, handed him the keys. Sloane bent down, muttering under his breath, twisting at the lock. The iron door squealed open. Inside, at first, there was nothing unusual. A stack of coins, a few deeds, some folded cloth, but Hollis's gaze sharpened. Lift the bottom. Sloane froze. Now. Reluctantly, he reached in and pried at the steel panel. It shifted, and the air in the room seemed to stop breathing. Hidden beneath the false bottom was a small black ledger bound with twine, and a bundle of rolled bills thick as a fist. The crowd gasped. Lila stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice clear. That's it. The ledger I kept. Hollis took it gently, untying the twine. You can read? He asked her. She nodded. My mother taught me before she passed. Then read it, he said. She opened the book, the pages smudged with sweat and time. Names, she whispered. Dates, amounts, every sale, every lie. Her voice gained strength as she turned the pages. He forged debts for widows, sold their sons to pay imaginary dues. And here, she pointed at one line, he charged Mr. Bracken twice for the same cattle drive, then took the difference for himself. The murmurs turned to shouts. Wyatt, standing at the edge of the crowd, went rigid. His men glanced at him, unsure. Sloane broke. They all wanted it cheap, he shouted. You think I did this alone? You think I made this town rotten? I just gave it what it asked for. But no one laughed this time. No one moved. Ezra stepped forward slowly, his hat low against the sunlight. You gave them excuses. That's worse. For a moment, the two men locked eyes, one burning with fury, the other with the calm of a man who'd already seen fire and survived. "Mr. Pike," Judge Hollis said, turning to the sheriff, "you were witness to these transactions?" The sheriff's shoulders sagged. I signed what he gave me. Didn't ask questions. I just wanted peace in town. Hollis's tone didn't rise, but the words hit like hammer blows. Peace built on silence is rot, Sheriff. You're relieved of duty, effective now. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Pike lowered his badge, laying it in the dust. Lila's hands were still on the book, knuckles white. Her breath came unsteady, not from fear, but from release. "It's all here," she whispered. "Everything." Wyatt stepped forward. "And my money?" Hollis gestured toward the rolled bills. "Right where you left it." Wyatt stared at the pile, then looked at Lila. For the first time, there was no mockery in his eyes, only a flicker of something like shame. "Guess that ledger makes fools of us all," he said quietly. Sloane lunged suddenly, grabbing for the book. "You'll hang me on paper?" But Ezra moved faster. One hand gripped Sloane's wrist, twisting it until the man fell to his knees. "You hung yourself. The minute you forgot people ain't cattle." Hollis raised his voice above the commotion. "Mr. Dyer, you'll be held until trial. Mr. Bracken, you'll answer for your part in the buying as well. And this town," his gaze swept over the crowd, "will remember today that silence is guilt by another name." He turned to Ezra. "And you, Mr. Cole, you've done enough for one lifetime." Ezra nodded, but his eyes drifted to the open ledger, to the ink and dust that had nearly buried a woman's name. "Maybe not yet," he said softly. The judge's eyes narrowed, curious. "What's left to do?" Ezra looked toward Lila, who stood beside Naomi, sunlight breaking across both their faces. "Tell them why I walked into that saloon in the first place." The judge hesitated. "You mean?" Ezra's voice came low, rough with memory. "About the night. I came too late." The crowd fell silent again, breath held between guilt and grace. The courthouse was no more than a widened room inside Dustwell's old bank, its walls still smelling of iron and whiskey. Outside, the sun hammered down on the wooden porch, turning the world white and airless. Inside, every eye was fixed on one man, Ezra Cole. He stood by the witness bench, hat in hand, dust still clinging to his boots. His face was carved in quiet resolve, but his eyes, dark, steady, carried storms older than the town itself. Judge Hollis sat behind the makeshift desk, the black ledger open before him like an open wound. "Mr. Cole," he said slowly, "you wished to make a statement before sentencing." Ezra nodded once. His voice came rough but sure. "Ain't much of a statement, Judge. More like a truth I've been running from." He paused, his gaze flickering toward Lila and Naomi in the front row. Naomi's small hand rested on Lila's knee, as though she already knew how to anchor a trembling soul. "I came to that saloon yesterday," Ezra began, "not because I thought I could fix anything. Truth is, I was buying medicine for my little girl. She's been sick near all her life. I figured one more trip to town wouldn't hurt." He swallowed hard, voice deepening. "Then I heard a woman cry. I didn't mean to get involved. I told myself I had enough ghosts already. But that cry—" He looked down at his calloused hands. "It sounded just like the night my wife died." The room went still. He lifted his eyes. "Years back, there was a fire. Folks said it started from a lantern kicked over in a fight. I was out mending fences, half a mile away. By the time I came running, the cabin was ash and smoke. My wife, Elena, she was still inside. Nobody moved to help her. They said it was too late. I told myself they were right, that I couldn't have saved her. But that lie never left me alone." He exhaled slowly, every word dragging through the silence. Rate X slow. "So when I saw Lila on that stage, rope round her wrists, I heard Elena again. I heard every second I was too late. And I knew if I stayed sittin', if I looked away, I'd be no better than the ones who let her burn." A tremor passed through his voice, soft but undeniable. "That's why I bid. Not 'cause I thought I was some hero. I just didn't want to arrive too late again." Hollis leaned back, eyes steady but glassy with understanding. "And you call that guilt?" Ezra nodded. "Guilt's what keeps a man breathin' long after he wishes he'd stopped." Lila's throat tightened. She had never heard him speak so much at once, never seen him so bare. Ezra continued, quieter now. "But something changed out there, Judge. When Wyatt came with his gun, when I saw Naomi gaspin' and Lila standin' over her, I saw what livin' looks like. Fear and hope all twisted together. It ain't about not being afraid. It's about still reaching out anyway." Wyatt, sitting under guard near the wall, stared at the floor. The words struck harder than any bullet could have. Ezra's gaze found him. "You did a cruel thing, Bracken. But cruelty ain't the same as evil. You stopped when you didn't have to. You gave water to a dying child. That means something, whether you like it or not." The judge spoke then, his voice softer. "Mr. Cole, what do you ask of this court?" Ezra looked around, at the townsfolk who had once turned away, at the saloon doors that had hidden sin in plain sight, at Lila, who had found her own strength in speaking the truth. "I don't ask for anything for me. But I do ask something of this town. When you hear a cry next time, don't wait for someone else to answer it." The stillness that followed was heavy with shame, but also with awakening. Judge Hollis closed the ledger slowly. "The record will show that Mr. Ezra Cole acted under the law of conscience, a law higher than any written here." He turned to Wyatt. "Mr. Bracken, your property dealings will be seized until restitution is made to every person wronged by Mr. Dyer's fraud. You'll work it off if you must." Wyatt nodded once. "I'll pay it back. And you'll start by funding a school," Hollis added. So the next generation of Dustwell doesn't grow up believing ignorance is law. A ripple went through the room. Surprise, then quiet approval. The judge turned to Sloane Dyer, shackled and sullen. As for you, you'll stand trial in Fort Bridger for human trafficking, fraud, and bribery. God help you more than the law can. Sloane sneered, but no one looked at him. The crowd's attention had shifted to the front row, to Lila rising slowly from her seat. Judge, she said softly, there's one thing left. That ledger. I'd like it burned. Hollis frowned. Burned? Yes, she said, her voice trembling but sure. It's done enough harm. Let the truth live in people's hearts, not on paper. Ezra looked at her, proud, wordless. Hollis studied her for a long moment, then nodded. So be it. He handed the ledger to Lila. She took it with both hands, walked to the open stove in the corner, and laid it in the coals. The paper caught quickly, flames curling around the edges like gold. The smell of burning ink filled the room, a bitter scent that somehow felt clean. No one spoke. When it was done, Lila turned back. The firelight danced across her face, softening the hard lines carved by fear. Outside, a wind rose, stirring the dust along Main Street. Clouds rolled in low, dark and full, heavy with promise. First rain of the season, Hollis said quietly. The Reverend's voice came from the back. Maybe the land's ready to forgive, same as us. Lila reached down for Naomi's hand, but the little girl had already moved toward Ezra, wrapping her arms around his waist. We can go home now, Pa? Ezra crouched to her height, voice low, husky. Yeah, baby. Home. He looked up at Lila, and though neither spoke, something passed between them. Simple, steady, sacred. Not romance, not rescue. Just understanding. Judge Hollis gathered his papers. Court's adjourned, he said. Dustwell. I hope you remember this day longer than your whiskey debts. As people filed out into the rain, some raised their hats to Ezra. Others just nodded. The smallest gesture of respect, but honest. Wyatt lingered a moment before leaving. He met Ezra's eyes, then Lila's, and without a word, tipped his hat and stepped into the downpour. Thunder rolled in the distance. The rain hit the dry earth like applause. Ezra stood at the doorway, letting a few drops strike his face. For the first time in years, he didn't flinch. Come on, he said softly. Let's get out of the storm. They walked together under the fading rumble of thunder. 3 silhouettes crossing the muddy street. The past behind them. The smell of clean rain ahead. And in the heart of a town that had once sold its soul, the first honest drops of forgiveness began to fall. The rain didn't stop until nearly dawn. All night it whispered against the roof, a slow rhythm that filled the silence with something alive and forgiving. Ezra lay awake for a long time, listening to it. The sound had a weight, like breath on glass, fragile but constant. The kind that reminds a man he's still here. When the gray of morning pressed against the window, he rose quietly, careful not to wake Naomi or Lila. The little girl slept curled by the stove, cheek on her folded arm. Lila had taken the chair beside her. Somewhere in the night, her head slipped to her shoulder, hands loosely clasped, even in sleep, alert, as if the world might still demand proof of her safety. He stood a while just watching them. A log cracked softly in the hearth. Smoke rose lazy into the rafters. The air smelled of wet ash, coffee grounds, and something faintly sweet. Lavender from Lila's dress, maybe. He turned to the window. The rain had slowed to a mist, hanging between ground and sky, turning the fields silver. The horses stood near the fence, coats dark with dew. The world was quiet. Not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of something that had finally said what it needed to say. He poured yesterday's coffee, thick and bitter, and stepped onto the porch. Boards creaked under his weight, still damp. The horizon stretched wide and pale. Low clouds rolled like smoke over red dirt hills. He thought of 2 short days, the auction, the gunfire, the courtroom, and the rain. The land looked the same, but the ground of him had shifted. Maybe peace isn't escaping the storm. Maybe it's learning how to breathe in the middle of it. Pa? Naomi stood in the doorway, voice hoarse from sleep. You're up early, he said. I heard the rain talking, she whispered. Sounded like Mama. Ezra crouched to meet her gaze. Maybe it was. She always had a way of showing up when we needed her most. Is Miss Lila staying? That's up to her, he said. I think she should, the girl said simply. The house sounds less empty when she's here. Lila appeared in the doorway, hair loose, eyes soft with sleep. I heard my name, she smiled. She bent, smoothing a stray curl from Naomi's forehead. Morning, sweetheart. Ezra nodded toward the fields. Rain did us a favor, soil's soft again. Planting weather soon. That sounds like work, Lila teased. It is, the kind that feeds you back. She stepped onto the cool boards, barefoot. Then maybe I'll stay a little while longer. They watched the mist drift off the pasture. A hawk cut through the fog, wings wide, free. Later, breakfast, cornbread and eggs, whatever they had left. Ezra mended a latch. Lila scrubbed the counter clean. An ordinary morning. And maybe that's what made it feel holy. When the sun finally broke, puddles turned to mirrors. Far along the ridge a rider appeared, dark against bright sky. Bracken, Ezra said. Lila's hand stilled. You think he's come back? Not for a fight. If he wanted one, he'd have come last night. The rider stopped at the gate, dismounted, shoulders heavy with something that wasn't pride. He hung a small burlap sack on the fence post, tipped his hat, and rode into the light. Ezra found coins inside, rain dark, faintly gleaming, and a note with ink running. For what's gone and what can't be paid. He didn't have to, Lila murmured. No, but maybe he needed to. Inside, Naomi set 3 cups on the table again. One for each of us, and one extra for when folks come by. Planning visitors? Ezra smiled. Maybe Miss Lila can teach me letters. And we can teach others too. Like the judge said, a school. Lila's surprise softened into a smile. That's a fine idea. Then we'll make it happen, Ezra said. This place has seen enough silence. The day wore on, gentle and unhurried, mending the barn door, feeding the animals, clearing weeds from the porch. Lila laughed as chickens chased Naomi. Ezra pretended not to see, but the grin tugged anyway. Afternoon clouds gathered, soft, without threat. The air smelled of new grass and wet cedar. Ezra hummed a tune half-remembered from Elena's voice long ago. Evening came, porch glowing pink and gold. Naomi slept in Lila's lap, fingers curled around a wildflower. I used to think freedom would feel loud, Lila said, like galloping horses and shouting wind. But it's quieter than I thought. Most good things are, Ezra answered. What does it feel like? Letting go like breathing after holding it too long. Hurts a little, but it's worth it. You think the world forgets what we've done? No, but maybe it remembers how we end it. Night settled easy. Inside, the 3 cups waited. Warm, simple, unspoken promises of belonging. Ezra paused in the doorway, listening to rain begin again, lighter this time, as if testing its own forgiveness. Don't be late again, he whispered. You won't be, Lila murmured, half asleep. The roof hummed. 3 souls breathed in rhythm with the rain. The past hadn't vanished. It had simply softened, like the sound of water on tin. As the horizon blurred between night and dawn, the truth he'd missed for years came clear. Sometimes salvation isn't riding fast or fighting hard. It's staying. Setting down the weight. Sharing the coffee. Letting someone teach you how to breathe again. He looked once more at the 2 figures sleeping. The woman who found her voice. The child who taught him grace. And he smiled. Outside, a streak of light broke the clouds, scattering the last of the storm. The desert glowed wet and new. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a single hawk rose into open sky. Dustwell was quiet now, but inside that little farmhouse, the world had already begun again.